What's going on, guys? This is Martyrs Brigade 99 coming to you once again with another session of Dark Souls PvP. Alright, guys, this is basically going to be, I'm going to try to stop it at 3. So I would say probably a 3-part series of a lot of good footage in my personal opinion. I'm using a build that I've actually never used before. So this is why we're going to call this particular video Just Another Day in the Burg. Now, I think the challenge with this 3-part series is that I really need to find something to talk to for 60 minutes. Right? Because to the extent that you guys are familiar, I try to upload videos that are, at least 20 minutes in length. Because since a lot of my videos are spread out, in most cases I'll kind of upload maybe once a week. But since I do upload once a week, I try to ensure that whatever uploads that I have are pretty good uploads. Right? So this is going to be my Just Another Day in the Burg series, and we're going to kind of cover as many topics as as I can think of, right? So I'm just basically freestyling this one. I don't really have anything in particular to talk about. So hopefully, I kind of won't get into the situation where I'm, kind of half talking, then half going silent and all like that. Right. All right, so let's just kind of dive into it. This is a build that I'm experimenting with. I've never used this build before. I've never used a bow before. I've never used a buckler before. Right now, I know some of you guys may say, "Hey, dude, you're a noob. There's no buckler there. That looks like a grass shield." Well, yeah, that's true. All right, but in putting this build together, I kind of went through a few stages. Right, stages of trying to decide what exactly I want to do with this build, and trying to decide upon what equipment choices that I would make. Because as you guys notice, I started off with the pike and the grass shield. After using the grass shield and the pike, I kind of said, I don't want to use that anymore. Right? And I think this is one of the problems that you face when creating builds. Now, some of you pros out there, you kind of know what you want to do and you just kind of goes to it. Well, guess what, guys? I'm still a noob, right? I'm not really a pro. So a lot of times, I may think one thing in my mind, but once I get to experimenting with it, I get to realizing that, this build is not really exactly what my intentions where my intentions wanted to take me. And sometimes either I'll delete the build altogether or I'll just kind of make changes to it. Right. And this is kind of what happened with this build. My intention was, after I made that Silver Knight series, I said, you know what? That spear play was actually pretty awesome. But I don't necessarily want to use the Silver Knight spear. So I kind of looked over some of the other spears. I kind of looked at the Dragon Slayer spear. I took a look at the pike and some of the other spears, and I decided that I wanted to use the pike. Well, after about, 25 matches of pike action, I realized that I didn't like it. Right? For several reasons. One reason is there's a 24th strength requirement just to use the pike. Alright, and when you're creating builds, sometimes these where you invest your points can really make a difference. In most cases you don't really want to waste points if you don't really have to. Who wants to waste soul levels? And I kind of experimented with the pike, and I went back and forth with the Silver Knight spear, and I realized that the difference in damage, when comparing the pike with the Silver Knight spear, just really didn't justify 8 soul levels in my personal opinion. The damage output just wasn't really that significant. I think the damage output was a difference of maybe 50. you know, and I would say 50 at the most. So in other words, with the difference in 50 really justify 8 soul levels? Not in my opinion. Right? You could invest those soul levels elsewhere. You know, perhaps endurance, depending upon what other equipment you want to carry. Perhaps vitality. You know, maybe using some of the basic miracles and sorceries could have been an option. Or another option could also be 8 soul levels invested in attunement in the event that you kind of wanted to use pyromancy or something else. Right? So it just didn't justify it for me. You know, the pike originally was a good idea, but actually, once I created it, I said, you know what, the pike is not really necessary. I could just go ahead and stop at 16 strength as opposed to the 24 strength. Another reason why I kind of reverted back to the Silver Knight Spear was because of the running dash attack. You know, that dash attack on the pike sucks in my personal opinion. Now, what exactly is the running dash attack, to the extent that you guys are not familiar? It's kind of like a bulldozer attack, what I would call. You know, you kind of brace yourself and you just charge, with your spear in hand. But that particular attack can leave you open to backstabs and other punishing attacks. And this is why I decided not to use it. Whereas with the Silver Knight Spear, the running attack is more, is more crisp, is more clean. It's like a quick 1 or 2 hand thrust, and then you just kind of go back to position. Whereas with the pike's charge attack, not only are you kind of bulldozing, but you kind of, reposition yourself at the end of the charge, giving somebody a full opportunity to punish. And I really didn't like it. So, the 8 soul levels, in addition to my dislike for the R2 attack and charge attack, kind of brought me back to the Silver Knight Spear. Alright, and as I said before, this is kind of the things that I go through when I'm creating builds. Because for all you pros out there that, kind of know exactly what you want and you go straight to it, it's not that easy for me. I kind of like to think things through, and I don't really like to take soul levels for granted. And because of that, I try to make them as close to near perfect based upon my standards as I can. Now, obviously people have their own standards. I'm talking about close to my own standards. Alright, now, another thing that I kind of went back and forth with regard to this build. The use of the shield. Right, as you guys can see, I'm kind of experimenting with the buckler. Now, this is a shield that I almost never see used. Right? And, I can kind of understand why. Actually, let me kind of pull up the stats for it. You only get a 76% physical damage reduction. 32% magic reduction, and everything else is, I would say subpar. In addition to that, it only has a stability rating of 49, right? Which can be a huge turnoff, understandably. But, it's easy to get comfortable when you get the 100% damage reduction. But see, the thing with me is I'm trying to get out of my comfort zone. And I'm trying to experiment with things that I wouldn't normally experiment with. And I think this is a perfect example. Using the target shield or the buckler. Right? Or some other kind of small shields that you almost never use. Or never see, rather. Kind of like, the red and white spear. Red and white shield, and some of these others. Now, I think the only small shield that I do see heavy use of, and that's heavy use relative to other small shields, is probably the heater shield. I see a lot of people using that. Those guys that are really, kind of hot shots with parrying, I kind of see them using that. But other than that, you almost never see bucklers or targets or some of those other shields. Alright, So this was another thing that I kind of went back and forth with. Now, granted, there is a benefit to using medium shields. You know, one example with the grass shield, you get the stamina regeneration, which is awesome. You know, that's an awesome benefit. But on the other hand, that grass shield is pretty weak against magics. Now, someone may say, hold on there, Brigade, now the shield that you're using is also weak against magic. So, well, that's true. But I think it's just going to force me to try to improve in my evading attacks. Right? And I think, you know, because actually when I first started with the PvP, I used the crest shield like probably 99% of the time. Right? And because the crest shield offered very good magical damage, I was never really concerned with dodging attacks. Right? Because my thing is, I'm like, well, hey, I get a 80% magic reduction. So, I mean, who really cares? I'll just brace myself and take it. But when I started to experiment with other shields, you know, that didn't have, you know, similar stats to that, you know, it kind of forced me to say, okay, I mean, I'm kind of good with the shield action, but I also need to learn how to evade a little bit. And I think by using this target shield, it will definitely help me to improve my evading skills. Alright? Because, I mean, this thing sucks. The only benefit to it is when it comes to parrying. Right now, I've heard some guys say, you know, you get a larger parry window and all like that. Well, I mean, I don't really know, but I definitely can say from personal experience is that I have to get used to the difference in timing. Because whereas I did a lot of parrying with the medium shield, I was always used to the timing of the medium shields. But now that I'm transitioning, I'm noticing that it's somewhat different, right? Now, I'm not really sure how much different because I'm still kind of experimenting with it, but it is definitely different. So, you know, I kind of need to practice with this a while before I'm kind of decent with the parrying, which is another thing that I'm trying to improve on. Because granted, I'm pretty good with the setup parries, right? But some of those blind parries that you see a lot of these guys constantly doing, I suck at those, right? And it's mainly because I just do not like to run up anybody and spamming the parry. Because, I don't know, in some cases, although the final result will be effective, it just looks weird to me, someone who just runs up to somebody and hitting the parry, right? And in addition to that, I mean, I think anyone can land a parry when you're attempting like 100 times, right? So I don't know, I kind of need to improve on those blind parry techniques. I'm pretty sure you guys have heard me say that before. You know, I kind of know my own strengths and weaknesses and areas that I need to improve. So, I mean, as do most people, I would assume. But all this really talks about, in my personal opinion, is trying to leave your comfort zone. Now, what exactly do I mean by trying to leave your comfort zone? When I really first started in PvP, you know, and I kind of learned how to backstab, I didn't really practice any other tactics, right? Because I always use backstabs as my clutch move. So in other words, let's just say I'm kind of swinging and I'm missing and I'm seeing that I'm losing. One thing that I would always do, I would say, okay, let me just kind of go in for a lock BS, right? Because that can bring me from losing to kind of closing the margin. And after a little time, you know, and actually, not even was I doing that, but I was kind of carrying that ridiculous hornet ring everywhere that I went and used it with every weapon combination that I chose. Now, initially, you know, even though I did carry the heavy hornet ring, you never saw me using it with a Black Knight Great Axe or anything like that. Now, I would use it with, let's just say, a rapier, you know, or I would use it with a dagger, and I might even use it with a claymore or something like that, depending upon where I was, like maybe the kiln or the forest. But you know, once I started to PvP in the Burg, I realized, like, you know what? Why am I really walking around with a hornet ring? In other words, am I really getting better when I'm basically bringing the matches and actually relegating the matches down to, I don't know, let's just say 2 or 3 moves? I mean, because think about it. If you're using a hornet, you know, even with a rapier, you're probably going to inflict about, I don't know, let's just say 1200 damage. And to the extent that a lot of people only have about, I don't know, let's just say 1800 vitality. Okay, you only have 600 to go. Right? So you've basically relegated that match to almost nothing. Now, I think in some cases that's good, you know, particularly when you're doing kind of invasions, especially when you're invading gankers, right? Now, I'm not saying you should do it all the time, because actually I've gotten to the point where I tried to fight gankers without a hornet ring. Right now, sometimes I do, depending upon where the gankers are, depending upon, you know, how annoyed I am with the gankers. You know, sometimes I'll say, you know what, I'm going to teach these guys a lesson, so it is what it is. But in most cases, I just kind of stay away from those areas, because I'm trying to get to a point to where I'm improving my gameplay. And I think the only way that I can improve is if I stay away from things like hornet rings and stuff like that. And I'm forced to, you know, find new tactics and other strategies and kind of put them all together, find the right combination. Right? But with regard to leaving your comfort zone, you know, I think the comfort zone is really what prevents a lot of people from getting better with any particular build. Alright, case in point, this build that I'm using right now, I mean, I've never used a bow before, you know. I've never used the target shield before, you know, or the buckler rather. But guess what? I definitely wouldn't get good at it if I resorted to backstabs whenever convenient. Alright? I definitely wouldn't get good at it. And I notice that a lot of people do that. You know, they're kind of in a situation to where they say, okay, I'm going to kind of play my build, but when it's time for me to lose, you know, or when I notice that I'm losing, I'm just going to resort to what I know will get me a win. I'm actually trying to steer away from that. And if you guys would notice in this, I don't know, at least 2-part series, you will notice that there will be a lot of opportunities to backstab that I simply do not choose to take them. Right? And I'm kind of at a point to where I'm trying to focus more so on improving how I play my build versus trying to win. Right? Because one thing about me, I'm not an ultra competitive guy, at least not with video games. Right? Because in other words, I'm not going to earn any money. Right? I'm not going to, you know, I mean, I just kind of do this for fun. I mean, it's not an occupation, it's not a job, it's just kind of entertainment. You know, something that I use to kind of, you know, get away from things in life. You know, get away from the thoughts of, you know, bills and, you know, landscaping and everything else you have to do. Alright, so I really, you know, this is kind of like not my life. So some of those guys that are kind of ultra, you know, kind of super ultra competitive, it's not that deep to me. Right? So this is why, you know, do I care about winning and losing? Not really. Right? I just kind of want to get better. And in my personal opinion, if I wanted to get good at this build, you know, I should focus on what this build was intended on. Now, if I wanted to, do a lot of parries and BS's, I mean, my thing is, why not just create a thief build? That kind of uses maybe rapiers or maybe daggers. That would kind of be a perfect build to kind of do a whole bunch of critical attacks on. But this particular build focuses on the bow action and the bait and switch. Right? Now, some of you guys may say, what exactly is the bait and switch? Well, I kind of learned this tactic from good old Pep. Right? He was the first person I saw use the bait and switch. Now, I'm not saying he's the originator of it. I'm just saying that's the first person that I saw use it. Right? Now, the bait and switch is kind of like where you kind of shooting off with the bow and the other person is kind of annoyed, and because of that they kind of charge in. And because you anticipate them either charging in for a BS or an attack, you quickly transition from your bow to your shield or your right hand weapon, and you either parry their attack or you counter their BS attempt with a BS. And that's a tactic that's kind of slick, but it definitely requires some practice. Right? So that's kind of a technique. I mean, you'll see me do it a few times in here, but I really want to get good with it. Right? And getting good with it really requires me firing off with my bow, probably getting hit tons of times, but learning the timing of some of these attacks and learning how to anticipate them correctly. But guess what? I would never learn these things if I just resorted to what I did best. Another example is with the pyromancer, right? You'll have some guys out there that are kind of good with pyromancy. Well, actually, I won't say they're kind of good, but let's just say they're using a pyromancy build or faith build or whatever kind of build you're using, and let's just say, actually, I'll just use a faith build for example. And let's just say you're using a faith build with, I don't know, spear action. And let's just say, you kind of find somebody and you're like, man, this guy is dominating me with a spear. But because you're so afraid of losing, you resort to spamming the wrath of gods. You want to know why? Because you know that spamming the wrath of gods in some cases will eventually inflict some damage. Right? But if you resort to what's easiest, are you really getting better at using that spear? No. You want to know why? Because you're not using that spear to the death. You're saying, you know what, I'll use the spear action to the extent that I see myself losing. And then that'll basically be how I improve my spear action. In other words, I'll use it to the extent that I'm winning, but then as soon as I start losing, I'm just going to start resorting to what I know will nearly guarantee me a win. Right? And that's kind of like the same thing that I was talking about in my pyromancy vid. Because in other words, even though I can backstab, I definitely can do that. I can lock BS. In some cases I can roll BS. I can definitely do that. But if I'm using a pyromancer build, and the purpose of a pyromancer is to, throw fireballs and whatnot, learning the timings of the fire tempest and some of these others, how will I really get good at being a pyromancer if as soon as I see me losing, I say, okay, I'm not doing good with the casting, so let me just kind of go in for some lock BS's. Well, that's not teaching me anything. Because at the end of the day, if you want to get better at something, you kind of need to lose by continuing to practice that tactic. Right? So now, this is kind of a stage that I'm going through, and you guys will notice it. There will be a lot of opportunities for me to BS, and most of those cases I won't even take it. right? Especially a lot of those situations where a guy's rolling a lot. A lot of times I'll just keep rolling myself, despite, you know, myself being punished in some cases. Well, alright guys, I kind of did a long rant about a couple things in this particular video, so I'll kind of end it here. And we'll pick it up in part 2 of Just Another Day in the Burg. Alright guys, stand by for part 2. Martyrs Brigade.